The morning rain tapped against the windows of Riverside Community Center as Maya hurried through the front doors, shaking droplets from her old umbrella. She was 10 minutes late for her music appreciation class, something that would have mortified her younger self but barely registered now. These days, being on time was a luxury she couldn't always afford. Maya slipped quietly into the back row of the small classroom, hoping nobody would notice her entrance. The other students were already settled in their seats, most of them gray-haired. Retirees who had the luxury of punctuality, they sat in neat rows, notebooks open, pens ready, looking eager and well-rested. Maya envied them their unhurried mornings and full night's sleep. She pulled out her worn composition notebook. It's the same one she'd been using for 3 different classes. The pages were filled with her careful handwriting. Notes about Mozart's symphonies mixed with grocery lists and work schedules. At 31, she was easily the youngest person in the room. But she felt decades older than her classmates, who chattered excitedly about weekend concerts and their grandchildren's recitals. Professor Williams was discussing the structure of Baroque music, his hands moving expressively as he described the mathematical precision of Bach's compositions. Maya found herself writing down every word, even though she could probably teach this class herself. But that was a thought she quickly pushed away. Those days were long gone. The other students occasionally raised their hands to ask questions or share their thoughts. Mrs. Patterson, who sat in the front row, loved to talk about her late husband's record collection, Mr. Rodriguez. Often compared classical pieces to the jazz he'd played in his youth. They were all so comfortable sharing their musical experiences, their memories, their opinions. When Professor Williams asked the class what they thought about a particular Chopin piece he'd just played, hands shot up around the room. Maya kept her eyes down, pretending to take notes. Now she had plenty to say about Chopin, more than anyone in this room could imagine. But speaking up would invite questions she wasn't ready to answer. "What about you, Maya?" Professor Williams called out, making her heart skip. "You're always so quiet back there. What did you think of that piece?" Maya looked up briefly, meeting his kind eyes before glancing away. "It was beautiful," she said. Simply, very emotional. Professor Williams waited, clearly hoping for more, but Maya had already looked back down at her notebook. She heard him clear his throat before moving on to discuss the piece's technical aspects. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but it was better than the alternative. During the break, Maya stepped outside for some fresh air. The rain had stopped, leaving the parking lot dotted with puddles that reflected the gray sky. She checked her phone and saw 3 missed calls from her younger brother Danny. Probably needed help with something again. At 19, he was supposed to be figuring things out on his own, but Maya couldn't help herself from jumping in to fix his problems. She was about to call him back when Mrs. Patterson appeared beside her, holding 2 paper cups of coffee from the vending machine. "You look like you could use this, dear," the older woman said, offering Maya one of the cups. "Thank you, that's very kind." Maya accepted the coffee gratefully. It was terrible, but it was warm. "No, I've been watching you in class, Mrs. Patterson said gently. "You write down everything Professor Williams says, but you never participate in our discussions. Are you enjoying the class?" Maya nodded quickly. "Oh yes, absolutely. I'm learning so much. But you seem to know quite a bit about music already. The way you listen, the way you take notes. It's different from the rest of us. More focused." Felt panic rising in her chest. She couldn't afford to stand out. Couldn't risk anyone asking too many questions. "I just find it interesting," she said. Finishing her coffee, even though it was still too hot, Mrs. Patterson studied her with sharp but kind eyes. "Well, if you ever want to talk about music, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Sometimes the quiet ones have the most interesting things to say." Back in class, Professor Williams was setting up for the second half of the lesson. Maya tried to focus on his words about romantic period composers, but her mind kept drifting. She thought about the piano gathering dust in her tiny apartment, the one she'd bought secondhand 3 years ago and barely touched. She thought about her music books, packed away in boxes under her bed. She thought about the dreams she'd carefully folded up and put away, like winter clothes in summer. The truth was, sitting in this class was both wonderful and torture. Every piece Professor Williams played, every technique he explained, every historical detail he shared reminded her of a life she'd once lived. A life where music wasn't just something you appreciated from a distance, but something that flowed through your fingers and filled your entire being. But that life belonged to someone else now. Someone who'd had different choices, different responsibilities, someone who'd been able to put her own dreams first. As the class ended and students began packing up their things, Professor Williams made an announcement that made Maya's stomach drop. Before you all leave, I want to remind you about our final project. As I mentioned at the beginning of the semester, each of you will need to perform a piece for the class. Nothing too complicated, just something that demonstrates what you've learned about musical expression and interpretation. The other students nodded and murmured excitedly among themselves. Maya felt like she might be sick, she said, raising her hand hesitantly. Would it be possible for me to write a research paper instead? I'm not really comfortable performing. Professor Williams looked surprised. Oh, I'm sorry, Maya, but performance is a required component of this class. It's listed in the syllabus. The whole point is to experience music from the artist's perspective, not just the audience's. I understand, but I really would prefer to write about music rather than play it. I'm afraid that's not an option. But don't worry, we're not expecting professional level performances. Even if you just play Mary Had a Little Lamb on the piano, that's perfectly fine. The important thing is that you try. Maya felt trapped. She needed this class to complete her general education requirements. She'd already paid for it, and she couldn't afford to take it again. But performing in front of people, even badly, it felt impossible as she walked to her car in the community center parking lot. Maya's phone buzzed with another call from Danny. This time she answered. Maya, thank God. Listen, I need help with my rent. I know I said I wouldn't ask again, but I'm really in a bind here. She closed her eyes and leaned against her car door. How much, Danny? Just $400. I'll pay you back as soon as I get my next paycheck, I promise. $400. Nearly half her monthly grocery budget. But she couldn't let her baby brother get evicted, not when she had the power to help him. Okay, she said quietly. I'll transfer it tonight. You're amazing, Maya. I don't know what I'd do without you. As she drove home through the busy afternoon traffic, Maya thought about the performance requirement hanging over her head like a storm cloud. She had 3 weeks to figure out how to play something simple and unremarkable. Something that wouldn't draw attention or raise questions. But deep down, she knew the real challenge wouldn't be playing poorly enough to blend in. The real challenge would be touching those keys again and not letting 8 years of buried dreams come flooding back. The next week arrived too quickly for Maya's liking. She'd spent the weekend researching simple piano pieces online, thinking maybe she could find something basic enough that she could stumble through without embarrassing herself completely. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star seemed like a safe choice, or maybe Happy Birthday, something everyone would expect a beginner to attempt. She walked into class that Tuesday morning feeling slightly more confident about her plan. The other students were already discussing their piece selections excitedly. Mrs. Patterson chosen a Beethoven sonata that she'd played as a child. Mr. Rodriguez was going to perform a simplified version of a Duke Ellington jazz standard. Even quiet Mrs. Kim, who usually kept to herself, was talking about playing a Korean folk song her grandmother had taught her. Maya took her usual seat in the back corner, relieved that she'd figured out her strategy. She'd play something simple, make a few expected mistakes, and get through the requirement without drawing any attention to herself. Professor Williams entered the classroom carrying a stack of sheet music, looking more serious than usual. Set the papers down on his desk and surveyed the class with an expression Maya couldn't quite read. Good morning, everyone. I've been thinking about our final performances, and I've decided to make some adjustments to the assignment. Maya's stomach lurched. Adjustments were never good news. Instead of letting you all choose your own pieces, I'm going to assign specific compositions to each student. This will ensure that everyone is appropriately challenged, and that we have a good variety of musical styles represented. The class murmured with interest, though Maya noticed a few students looking nervous. She felt like she might throw up. Professor Williams began calling names and handing out sheet music. Mrs. Patterson received a gentle Schubert piece. Mr. Rodriguez got a beginner-friendly arrangement of Autumn Leaves. Mrs. Kim was given a beautiful but simple folk melody. Maya watched each assignment, growing more anxious by the minute. Professor Williams seemed to be matching pieces to each student's skill level and background, which meant he was paying more attention to them than she'd realized. "Maya," he called, and her heart stopped beating entirely. She walked to the front of the classroom on unsteady legs, aware that everyone was watching her. Professor Williams held out a thick packet of sheet music, much larger than what he'd given. The other students, Maya looked down at the cover page and felt the blood drain from her face. Ballade No. 1 in G minor by Frédéric Chopin. She recognized it immediately, of course. It was one of the most challenging pieces in the romantic piano repertoire, something that even advanced students at conservatories struggled with. "Professor Williams," she said quietly, her voice barely audible, "I think there's been a mistake." Looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before, not unkind, but firm in a way that made her stomach twist. "No mistake, Maya. I've been observing you all semester, and I think you're capable of more than you're letting on. But this piece, it's extremely difficult. I'm just a beginner. Are you?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. "Because I've noticed how you respond to the music we listen to in class. Your note-taking isn't random, Maya. You write down specific technical details that most beginners wouldn't even notice. You nod along to complex rhythmic patterns. And last week, when I played that Rachmaninoff piece, I saw you fingering along on your desk." Maya's cheeks burned hot. She hadn't realized anyone was watching her that closely. "I just find music interesting. Academically, perhaps. But I also think you're not giving yourself enough credit." He tapped the Chopin sheet music in her hands. "This piece will push you to discover what you're really capable of. Professor Williams, please. I'd really prefer something simpler. I don't want to embarrass myself." The rest of the class was listening to every word, and Maya felt exposed and vulnerable. She could see Mrs. Patterson leaning forward with concern, Mr. Rodriguez frowning with confusion. "Maya, part of learning is accepting challenges that feel uncomfortable. You've been coasting through this class, and I think it's time you engaged with the material on a deeper level." She wanted to argue further, but the look in his eyes told her it would be pointless, and she couldn't explain why this particular piece terrified her without revealing everything she'd worked so hard to keep hidden. "You have 3 weeks," Professor Williams continued. "I don't expect perfection, obviously. Just give it your best effort. Even if you can only manage the opening section, that's better than not trying at all." Maya walked back to her seat feeling like she was carrying a bomb instead of sheet music. The Chopin felt heavy in her hands, weighted with memories she'd tried so hard to bury. She barely heard the rest of the class lecture. Professor Williams was discussing the evolution of piano technique in the 19th century, but Maya was lost in her own thoughts. She stared down at the first page of the ballade, and despite herself, she could hear the opening measures in her head. The haunting melody that started so simply, before exploding into cascades of notes that demanded everything from a pianist's technical skill and emotional depth. After class, as students filed out discussing their assignments, Mrs. Patterson approached Maya's desk. "That's quite a challenging piece he gave you, dear," she said gently. Maya looked up, surprised by the kindness in the older woman's voice. "I don't think I can do it. May I see?" Mrs. Patterson held out her hand, and Maya reluctantly handed over the music. Mrs. Patterson flipped through the pages, her eyebrows rising higher with each turn. "Oh my. This is ... This is really something. My late husband used to say that Chopin wrote music that could make angels weep." She looked at Maya carefully. "Professor Williams must see something special in you to assign this. He's trying to teach me a lesson about being more participative in class." Mrs. Patterson handed the music back. "Piano lessons for 40 years before I retired. If you'd like some help getting started with this piece, I'd be happy to work with you." The offer was so unexpected and kind that Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. It's very generous, but I wouldn't want to impose. It wouldn't be an imposition at all. I miss teaching, to be honest. And this piece, well, it's been years since. I've had a chance to work on something so beautiful. Maya clutched the sheet music against her chest. "I'll think about it. Thank you." Walking to her car, Maya felt like she was trapped in a nightmare. She couldn't play this piece the way it deserved to be played without revealing who she really was. But she also couldn't fail the class. She needed those credits to finish her degree, needed the degree to qualify for better jobs. needed better jobs to keep supporting Danny and maybe someday have something left over for herself. She sat in her car for a long time before starting the engine, staring at the choppin' music on her passenger seat. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to figure out how to perform one of the most demanding pieces in classical piano literature, while pretending she'd never seen it before. As she drove home, Maya's phone rang. Danny again. "Hey, I just wanted to thank you again for helping." "With rent?" he said when she answered. "I know you sacrifice a lot for me." "It's what family does," she replied automatically. "I'm going to pay you back, I promise." "And Maya?" "I've been thinking about getting a second job. I don't want you to have to keep bailing me out." For a moment, Maya felt a flicker of hope. Maybe things were finally changing. She could start thinking about her own needs for once. "That sounds great, Danny. I'm proud of you for thinking ahead." After they hung up, Maya pulled into her apartment complex parking lot and sat for another moment. Through her windshield, she could see her building's windows, including her own on the second floor. Behind that window was her small, upright piano, silent and patient, waiting for hands that remembered how to bring music to life. 3 weeks to figure out the impossible. 3 weeks to play Chopin without playing Chopin. To demonstrate skill without revealing mastery. To touch the keys without unlocking the part of herself she'd locked away 8 years ago. She picked up the sheet music one more time, despite everything, felt her fingers unconsciously moving through the opening measures. The muscle memory was still there, buried but not forgotten. And that scared her more than anything else. Maya spent the first week after receiving the Chopin assignment doing everything possible to avoid thinking about it. She worked extra shifts at the diner where she waitressed, deep cleaned her apartment twice, and even volunteered to help Danny move his friend's couch. Anything to keep her mind off the sheet music that sat on her kitchen table like an unwelcome guest. But by Friday night, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She had 2 weeks left, and she hadn't even touched the piano. Maya made herself a cup of tea and finally sat down to really look at the music. The ballade opened innocently enough, the simple melody that could fool someone into thinking it was easy. But Maya knew better. She could see how the piece would unfold, how it would demand everything from her fingers, her heart, her soul. This wasn't just music. It was a journey through every emotion a human could feel. She found herself humming the opening theme, then quickly stopped. Even humming it felt dangerous. Maya had been avoiding her piano for years. But now she walked over to the small upright that dominated one corner of her tiny living room. She'd bought it from a family who was moving across the country, telling herself it would be nice to have around, maybe for background decoration. She'd never admitted, even to herself, that she needed it like other people needed air. She lifted the keyboard cover and stared at the keys. They looked the same as always, black and white, perfectly ordered. But touching them would be crossing a line she'd drawn 8 years ago. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Patterson. "How's the Chopin coming along, dear? Remember my offer? To help still stands." Maya stared at the message for a long time before typing back, still getting familiar with it. "Thank you for the offer." The weekend passed in a blur of anxiety. Maya found herself waking up at 3 in the morning with fragments of the ballade playing in her head. During her Sunday shift at the diner, she caught herself tapping out rhythms on the counter while she waited for orders. "You okay, honey?" asked Rita, the head cook. "You seem distracted today." Maya forced a smile. "Just tired. Long week, but it wasn't tiredness. It was the feeling of fighting against herself, of trying to contain something that wanted desperately to be free." By Monday night, Maya couldn't take it anymore. She had to at least try to play the piece, even if it was just to prove to herself that she could get through it badly enough to pass the class. She waited until after midnight, when her neighbors would be asleep, then finally sat down at the piano bench. Her hands were shaking as she placed them on the keys. The first notes came out tentatively, almost whispered. Maya played the opening melody slowly, carefully, trying to make it sound like someone who was reading the music for the first time. But even played softly and hesitantly, the beauty of the piece shone through. She made it through the first page before stopping abruptly. Her heart was pounding, and she realized she was crying. The music had unlocked something she'd worked so hard to keep buried. Maya quickly closed the piano and went to bed, but she couldn't sleep. The melody kept playing in her head, begging to be completed. The next night, she tried again. This time, she made it through the first section before the technical demands became too complex for her to fake ignorance. Her fingers wanted to fly across the keys, wanted to embrace the challenging passages that made this piece so magnificent. But she forced herself to stumble, to hesitate, to make the kinds of mistakes a beginner would make. It was exhausting and heartbreaking. Like trying to speak in a whisper when you wanted to shout with joy. By Thursday, Maya had established a routine. She would come home from work, eat dinner, wait for the building to quiet down, then spend an hour at the piano. Well, us getting better at playing poorly, but it was taking a toll on her. During her Friday morning shift at the diner, she was refilling coffee cups when she overheard two customers talking about a piano recital they'd attended the night before. The young woman who played Chopin was absolutely incredible. One of them was saying, "Made me want to cry. It was so beautiful." Maya's hand trembled as she poured, and she had to concentrate to keep from spilling coffee everywhere. "So, I always wished I could play piano," the other customer replied. "There's something magical about making music like that." Maya finished refilling their cups and hurried back to the kitchen, her chest tight with emotion. She thought about the magic these strangers were describing. The magic she'd given up 8 years ago when her parents died in that car accident, and she'd had to choose between her dreams and her family. That night, something broke inside her. As she sat at the piano working through the middle section of the ballade, Maya stopped trying to play it poorly. For just a few minutes, she let herself remember what it felt like to really play. Her fingers found their natural grace, and the music poured out of her like water from a broken dam. The complex passages that she'd been struggling through suddenly became fluid and expressive. The piano sang under her touch, filling her small apartment with sound that hadn't been heard there in years. Maya played for 20 minutes, lost in the music, before she suddenly realized what she was doing. She stopped so abruptly that the silence afterward felt like a physical blow. What if someone had heard? What if the neighbors called the landlord? What if Professor Williams somehow found out that she could actually play this piece? The piano and paced around her apartment, her heart racing. She'd been so careful for so long. Now she was losing control just when she needed it most. The next morning, Maya ran into her upstairs neighbor, Mr. Chen, at the mailboxes. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but was that you playing piano last night?" Maya's stomach dropped. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you. I know it was late." "Oh no, not at all. It was beautiful. Couldn't sleep. And hearing that music, ... it was like a gift. I haven't heard piano playing that lovely in years." Maya mumbled something about practicing for a class and hurried away, but Mr. Chen's words followed her. She was losing her ability to hide what she could do, and it terrified her. Over the weekend, Maya tried to get back to playing the piece badly, but it was like trying to unlearn how to breathe. Every time she sat at the piano, her hands wanted to play the way they remembered. The way they'd been trained through years of lessons and practice and pure love of music. She called in sick to work on Sunday and spent the day staring at the sheet music, trying to figure out how to solve an impossible problem. She had 1 week left before the performance, and she was trapped between two equally terrifying options: play the piece well and risk exposing herself, or play it so badly that she might fail the class entirely. Her phone rang, interrupting her spiral of anxiety. It was Danny. "Hey Maya, I wanted to let you know I got that second job I mentioned, starting next week." "It's wonderful, Danny. I'm really proud of you. Thanks." And Maya, ... "I know I haven't said this enough, but I appreciate everything you've sacrificed for me. I know you gave up a lot when Mom and Dad died." Maya closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten again. "You don't need to thank me. You're my family." "I know, but still, I want you to know that I see it. And someday, when I'm more stable, I want you to be able to chase your own dreams again." After they hung up, Maya sat in her quiet apartment, surrounded by the life she'd built through sacrifice and determination. She thought about dreams deferred and the cost of keeping secrets. She thought about the piano that had been silent for too long and the music that lived in her hands whether she wanted it to or not. 1 more week. 7 more days to figure out how to play Chopin without really playing Chopin. 7 more days to decide how much of herself she was willing to reveal. The sheet music lay open on the piano, just waiting for her decision. The morning of the performance arrived gray and drizzly, matching Maya's mood perfectly. She'd barely slept the night before, tossing and turning as fragments of the Chopin piece played endlessly in her head. Her alarm went off at 7, but she'd been awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and trying to calm her racing heart. Maya had taken the day off work, telling Rita she had a family emergency. This felt like an emergency of the most personal kind. She made coffee with shaking hands and tried to eat breakfast, but everything tasted like cardboard. The sheet music sat on her kitchen table where she'd left it the night before, the pages slightly worn from weeks of handling. She'd practiced her strategy of deliberate mistakes so many times that it had become almost automatic. Play hesitantly, stumble through the difficult passages, make it look like she was struggling with music that was clearly beyond her skill level. The plan was perfect in theory. In practice, it felt like trying to force herself to walk with a limp when her legs were perfectly fine. Maya arrived at the community center an hour early, hoping to get a few minutes alone with the piano in the classroom. But when she pushed open the door, she found Mrs. Patterson already there, arranging chairs in a neat semicircle around the upright piano. "Oh, hello, dear," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "I came early to help set up. Nervous about today?" Maya nodded. Not trusting her voice, she was beyond nervous. She was terrified. "I brought my camera," Mrs. Patterson continued, patting her purse. "I always take pictures at these kinds of events. My grandchildren love seeing what their old grandmother gets up to in her classes." The thought of being photographed while performing made Maya's stomach lurch. She hadn't considered that people might want to record this disaster. Other students began filtering in over the next 30 minutes. Mr. Rodriguez arrived carrying his sheet music and looking confident. Mrs. Kim came in quietly, as always, but she seemed excited about sharing her grandmother's folk song. Everyone was chatting and laughing, treating this performance like a celebration. Maya took her usual seat in the back corner. But today, it felt more like a hiding spot than a choice. She watched Professor Williams set up his recording equipment and arrange the performance order. She was scheduled to go 4th out of 7 students. It's not first, thank goodness, but not last either. Somewhere in the middle, where she couldn't escape but also couldn't delay much longer. "All right, everyone," Professor Williams called out, clapping his hands together. "Let's begin our final performances. Remember, this isn't about perfection. It's about sharing your musical journey with each other and celebrating how far you've all come this semester." Maya felt like she might throw up. Mrs. Patterson went first, playing her Beethoven sonata with careful precision. She made a few small mistakes, but her joy in playing was obvious. The class applauded warmly when she finished, and she beamed. Like she'd just performed at Carnegie Hall, Mr. Rodriguez followed with his jazz arrangement, adding his own improvisational flourishes that made everyone smile. Even Mrs. Kim, usually so reserved, received enthusiastic applause for her delicate folk melody. Then Professor Williams called Maya's name. "Maya Chen, you're up next. Ready to show us what you've done with that Chopin?" Maya walked to the piano. On unsteady legs, carrying her sheet music, even though she'd memorized every note weeks ago. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, could sense their curiosity about how she'd handle such a difficult piece. She sat down at the bench and adjusted the height, a habit from years of practice that she immediately regretted. It was too professional, too automatic. She placed her hands on the keys and took a deep breath. The opening notes came out soft and hesitant, exactly as she'd practiced. Maya played the first few measures carefully, adding small pauses and uncertainties that made it sound like she was reading the music for the first time. She could hear approving murmurs from the audience. Professors and students alike impressed that she was attempting something so challenging. But as the piece progressed, something started to go wrong with her plan. The music itself began to take over. The ballad told a story, and Maya found herself getting lost in that story, despite her best efforts to stay detached. The opening theme developed and transformed, becoming more complex and emotionally demanding. Her fingers, trained by years of practice that her classmates knew nothing about, began to respond to the music's natural flow. She caught herself playing a particularly difficult passage with too much ease and forced herself to stumble, creating an awkward pause. But the damage was already done. She could feel the energy in the room shifting, could sense Professor Williams leaning forward in his chair. Maya tried to regain control, to stick to her plan of mediocrity, but the music was fighting her. Every beautiful phrase demanded to be played beautifully. Every emotional moment in the piece called to something deep inside her that she'd been trying to suppress for 8 years. The middle section of the ballade was where Chopin had poured his heart out, where the technical demand served an emotional purpose that couldn't be faked or diluted. Maya approached these measures with growing panic, knowing that playing them well would expose her completely. But playing them poorly would destroy something precious. For a moment, she almost stopped entirely. Her hands hovered over the keys while the room held its breath. She could claim the piece was too difficult, apologize for not being prepared, and accept whatever consequences came with failing to complete the performance. But then she looked up and saw the faces watching her. Mrs. Patterson, who had been nothing but kind and encouraging. Mr. Rodriguez, who was leaning forward with genuine interest. Mrs. Kim, whose eyes were bright with anticipation. Even Professor Williams, who had challenged her but never with malice. These people had welcomed her into their small community, had shared their own musical journeys without judgment or pretension. They deserved better than the lie she'd been preparing to tell. Maya's hands found the keys again, and this time she didn't try to hold back. The music that poured out of the piano was nothing like what anyone expected. Gone were the hesitation and careful mistakes. Instead, the Chopin flowed with a grace and power that transformed the small classroom into something approaching a concert hall. Maya's fingers danced across the keys with a kind of technical mastery that takes decades to develop. Every note was perfectly placed, every phrase shaped with the kind of musical understanding that can't be taught in a semester-long appreciation class. The room had gone completely silent, except for the music. Maya was vaguely aware that Mrs. Patterson's mouth was hanging open, that Mr. Rodriguez had stopped taking notes, that Professor Williams was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. But mostly, she was lost in the music itself. For the first time in 8 years, Maya was allowing herself to really play, to connect with the piano in the way she'd been born to do. The ballade unfolded under her hands like a flower blooming, each section building on the last until the music filled every corner of the room and every corner of her heart. She played the dramatic climax with a passion that brought tears to her own eyes, then guided the piece through its final, gentle resolution. When the last note faded into silence, Maya sat perfectly still, her hands still resting on the keys, hardly believing what she'd just done. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, Mrs. Patterson began to clap. Others joined in, but it wasn't the polite applause they'd given the other performances. This was something different, something awed and amazed. Maya looked up and saw Professor Williams walking toward the piano, his expression unreadable. When he reached the bench, he spoke just loud enough for her to hear. "Who are you really?" The question hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of 8 years of secrets and sacrifice. Maya realized that her carefully constructed walls had just crumbled completely, and there was no going back to being the quiet student in the back row who never drew attention to herself. Her hands were still trembling from the performance. But now it was a different kind of trembling, not fear, but the aftermath of finally letting herself be seen. Maya stared at Professor Williams, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. His question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore or wave away. Around them, the other students sat in stunned silence, still processing what they'd just witnessed. Maya started, then stopped. How could she possibly explain 8 years of hiding, 8 years of pretending to be someone she wasn't? Mrs. Patterson was the first to break the spell. She stood up slowly, her eyes never leaving Maya's face. "My dear," she said softly, "that was the most beautiful thing I've heard in 40 years of teaching piano." 40 years of teaching? Maya repeated, confused. "I didn't just take piano lessons as a child," Mrs. Patterson said with a gentle smile. "I taught at the Riverside Conservatory until I retired 5 years ago. I've heard thousands of students play that piece, and I've never heard it played like that." Maya felt the walls of her carefully constructed life crumbling around her. "Mrs. Patterson, I can explain, ... You don't need to explain anything to me, honey, but you do owe yourself the truth." Professor Williams pulled up a chair and sat down beside the piano bench. His expression wasn't angry or accusatory, just deeply curious and perhaps a little concerned. "Maya, I've been teaching for 15 years. I've heard amateur pianists, I've heard professionals, and I've heard everything in between. What you just played, that wasn't someone who learned piano in a community college class. That was someone who's dedicated their life to music." Maya's hands were shaking in her lap. She looked around the room at faces that had become familiar. Over the past months, these people had become her friends, in a way. They deserved the truth, even if it meant losing the anonymity she'd worked so hard to maintain. "My name is Maya Chen," she said quietly, "and I was supposed to graduate from Juilliard 8 years ago." The room went even quieter, if that was possible. Mr. Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair. "Juilliard? As in the music school in New York?"
Maya
nodded, feeling tears start to build behind her eyes. "I had a full scholarship. I was in my final year, working on my senior recital. My professor said I had a real shot at a professional career." "What happened?" Mrs. Patterson asked gently. Maya took a shaky breath. This was the part of her story she'd never told anyone, not completely. "My parents died in a car accident in March of my senior year. Danny, my younger brother, was only 13. There were no other relatives who could take him in." The weight of that memory settled over her like a heavy blanket. She could still remember the phone call that changed everything, the way her practice room at Juilliard had suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else's life. "I had a choice," Maya continued. "Finish school and let Danny go into foster care, or come home and take care of him myself. It wasn't really a choice at all." Professor Williams was watching her with an expression of growing understanding. "So you gave up your scholarship?" "I gave up everything, moved back home, got a job, made sure Danny could stay in his school with his friends. He needed stability more than I needed to finish my degree. That was 8 years ago, Mr. Rodriguez." "Said your brother must be grown up now." Maya smiled sadly. "He's 21, but he's still figuring things out. College, jobs, relationships. I keep telling myself he doesn't need me anymore, but old habits are hard to break." Mrs. Kim, who had been silent throughout the exchange, spoke up for the first time. "You've been taking care of him all this time? Someone had to? And honestly, for a long time, I was too scared to go back to music. It hurt too much to think about what I'd given up. Easier to just ... pretend that part of me didn't exist anymore." "But you bought a piano," Mrs. Patterson observed. Maya laughed, but there was no humor in it. 3 years ago, I told myself it was just for decoration, but really, I think I was torturing myself. Having it there but never playing it felt like the punishment I deserved for walking away from my dreams. Professor Williams stood up and began pacing slowly around the piano, his academic mind clearly working through everything she'd told them. "Maya, do you realize what you've been doing to yourself? You've been carrying this incredible gift, this thing that most people would give anything to have, and you've been treating it like a burden." "It is a burden," Maya said, more sharply than she intended. "Do you know what it's like to hear music everywhere and know you could play it, but choosing not to? To walk past music stores and feel like you're seeing pieces of your old life in the window? To watch other people perform and feel jealous and heartbroken at the same time?" The room was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not shocked or confused, thoughtful and sympathetic. Mrs. Patterson walked over to the piano and sat down on the bench beside Maya. "Honey, can I tell you something? I gave up performing when I got married 50 years ago. My husband didn't ask me to, but I thought that's what wives did. They supported their husbands' careers and put their own dreams aside. She looked down at her hands, weathered now but still graceful. I spent decades teaching other people to do what I was too scared to do myself. And you know what I learned? Dreams don't die just because we ignore them. They just get heavier. Maya felt tears spilling down her cheeks now, but she didn't try to stop them. I don't know how to go back. It's been so long, and I'm not the same person I was at 23. Maybe that's a good thing, Professor Williams said. The person you were at 23 hadn't been tested by real life yet. The person you are now has proven she can make impossible sacrifices for love. That kind of emotional depth. It changes how you play music. Mr. Rodriguez stood up and walked over to Maya, pulling out his phone. My nephew is a music agent in the city. Would you mind if I sent him that video I just took of your performance? Maya's eyes widened. You recorded it? He's learning piano, and I like to show him different styles. But Maya, what you just played. People need to hear that. I'm not ready for that, Maya said quickly. I don't even know if I want to go back to performing. Mrs. Patterson took her hand. You don't have to decide everything today, dear. But you do need to stop hiding from who you are. Music isn't something you do, it's something you are. And trying to cut it out of your life is like trying to stop breathing. Professor Williams sat back down, his voice gentle but firm. Maya, I want to offer you something. The community college has a partnership with the State University's music program. They're always looking for exceptional students to join their graduate program, especially ones with real-world experience. I couldn't afford ... full scholarship, he interrupted, plus a stipend for living expenses. And it's only 30 minutes from here, so you could still be close to your brother. Maya stared at him, hardly believing what she was hearing. Would you do that for me? Because talent like yours doesn't come along often? Because everyone deserves a chance to become who they're meant to be, even if it takes a detour to get there. The room fell quiet again, as Maya processed everything that had happened in the past hour. She'd come here planning to hide her abilities and get through a class requirement. Instead, she'd accidentally revealed her biggest secret to a group of people who were now offering to help her reclaim her dreams. Her phone buzzed with a text from Danny. How did your performance go? I'm proud of you for taking that music class. I know it wasn't easy. Maya showed the message to Mrs. Patterson, who smiled. Sounds like your brother is more grown up than you give him credit for. Maybe it's time to let him take care of himself, Mr. Rodriguez added. Time for you to take care of Maya? Maya looked around the room at these people who had started as strangers and somehow become her support system. She thought about the piano in her apartment, waiting patiently for her to come home. She thought about the dreams she'd packed away 8 years ago, and whether it might be possible to unpack them again. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course you do, Professor Williams said. But Maya, don't think too long. The world has been waiting 8 years to hear you play again.
Ow.
Don't make it wait much longer. As the class ended and people began to pack up their things, Maya sat at the piano for a few more minutes. She played the opening measures of the Chopin piece one more time, but this time she wasn't hiding anything. This time she was just making music, and for the first time in 8 years, that felt like exactly what she was supposed to be doing.